Hello, good evening, everyone. I hope I can be heard by everyone. Mihin, may I know that I am heard by?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yeah, thank you very much. In class last week, we looked at the simplified version of AlexNet, and then we identified that these convolutions happen, max pooling things happen, and fully connected layers are there. And then what we did was we analyzed the amount of memory used by each of these layers, the number of parameters, and the number of floating point operations. Also, we were able to finally get graphs and understand that the situation, the memory is quite large at the early layers, and then the number of parameters that are required for computations is higher at the fully connected layers, and the number of floating point operations, that means the computations, are higher in the early convolution layers. We identified that, and then we stopped the class at that time. So after this AlexNet came the Zeiler-Fergus net. This is the 2013 winner. Not much of a change. So they had a similar network like AlexNet, so we will not talk about it too much. Then after that, an important network was produced called VGGNet. This is important because they had some rules, because when we studied the AlexNet, we realized that the network had been designed using a lot of trial and error experiments. But now with this BGGNet, they came up with a certain set of rules so that people can design networks afterwards. So those rules are still, some of them are intact. For example, all convolution layers are 3 by 3 convolutions, and all max pooling layers are 2 by 2 with a stride 2, and after pooling, you double the number of channels. So this lecture is being recorded, so I will upload the recording to Moodle, because this is a different time than that we usually meet, so no one will miss anything. So AlexNet had 5 convolution layers, and VGG has 5 convolutional stages. So you can see a picture of AlexNet here. So perhaps you remember that it started with 11 by 11 convolutions pooled, 5 by 5 convolutions pooled, and several 3 by 3 convolution layers, and 3 fully connected layers, and the softmax outputting 1000 probabilities. So VGG16, it has 16 layers. That's why it's called VGG16. You can see convolutional stages: two 3 by 3 convolutions and a pool, two with 3 by 3 convolutions and a pool, three 3 by 3 convolutions and a pool, three 3 by 3 convolutions and a pool, like that. And then, of course, this fully connected layers and the softmax that they remain. Of course, softmax is required because there is the ImageNet large scale visual recognition challenge, which had 1000 classes. So you can see its configuration. So now from 16, if you want to go for a 19 layer network, the similar structure is kept, but they add one more convolution layer, one more convolution layer, one more convolution layer, and so on. And one more thing is the number of channels is doubled after each pool. So you can see 64 channels here, it is doubled to 128. 120 channels here, it is doubled to 256. 256 channels here, doubled to 512. 512 is doubled to, okay, here it's not double, the rule is not kept, but usually it is doubling. So these rules help people to design networks afterwards. So VGG has much more parameters and consumes much more memory, and we should not use it for our work. There are other networks that we can use instead of the VGG net. Okay, so one thing about these 3 by 3 convolutions, first of all, we will look at that design choice. All convolutions are 3 by 3, stride 1, pad 1. Now, what we want to compare is the option 1, that means one 5 by 5 convolution versus two 3 by 3 convolutions. The reason is, if you have two 2 by 2 3 by 3 convolutions, the receptive field is 5 by 5. I covered the receptive field some time ago. That means when you go back 2 layers, what is the coverage of one pixel, one cell in the output layer? That is 5 by 5. So therefore, this is sort of equivalent. So if you take the 5 by 5 convolution from C number of channels to C number of channels, you know the number of parameters is 25 C squared. The number of floating point operations is for each output cell, you need 25C squared, so also 25C squared HW. But if you take two 3 by 3 convolutions, 3 by 3 from C to C, 3 by 3 from C to C, what that means is 9C squared, right? Here, and here also 9C squared. So when you add these two 9C squared, you get 18C squared. So 18C squared HW. So to get the same receptive field, in the option 1, you needed 25C squared HW. Now you need only 18C squared HW. So the amount of computations for the floating point operations has been drastically reduced while keeping the receptive field the same. And also you are sort of doubling the depth of the network. So therefore, 3 by 3 solutions are a definite advantage. Actually, some time ago, this fact was not in my mind. I did not know this. So therefore, we spend a lot of time in designing a network that uses a certain kind of a filter called infinite impulse response filters that were good for large kernels. But later on, we realized these large kernels are not required because these 3 by 3 convolutions are helpful. So there are situations large kernels can be useful, but we were not able to experiment with those. So this is the VGGNet. It's a very famous network. It's from Visual Geometry Group at Oxford. So this is the thing about these receptive fields. If you take a cell in the output tensor, it corresponds to 3 by 3 in the previous layer because it's a 3 by 3 convolution. So each of these cells here corresponds to 3 by 3. So finally it is 5 by 5. So the same receptive field as the 5 by 5 panels. Yeah. Same receptive field at a reduced amount of floating point operation. That's the advantage of having these small 3 by 3 convolution layers. So afterwards, everyone seems to use 3 by 3 convolution. Okay. So then all max pools are 2 by 2 side 2. That's another design choice. After pool, double the number of channels. So let's compare that. So C 2H 2W 2C HW. So this is the choice, right? So mm, so you double the number of channels because of the max pooling, you make the size half. I hope you can understand that. Double the number of channels is what they have done here. So 256 to 512. So what happens there? So con 3 by 3 C to C, con 3 by 3 2C to 2C. Yes. So therefore, what happens there? So here 4 HWC, here 2 HWC is the memory requirement. Memory requirement is equal to the size of the tensor. Number of parameters 9 C, here 36 C squared. Here large number of parameters and equal number of computations. So this is, you can see, much more advantageous. At least the memory requirement is less. Mm. You can keep the computations the same. Yeah. You have a higher number of parameters, learning capacity is high, right? Because of that reason. So I don't know too much to talk about this. I didn't think about it too much. Yes. So then after VGG, there came the so-called GoogleNet. People still use this for this some kind of things, but you should not use it. It's quite old. So in this one, there were some decisions. They had the so-called STEM network. So we realized that in the AlexNet, the memory use was extremely high for the early layers that you realize that. And then the computations were also very high for the early layers because there were convolutions. Also, the size of the tensors in those layers was large. As a result, what they did was they had something called STEM network aggressively downsample the image. So that's one design choice GoogleNet made. And then they had this so-called Inception module. Maybe you have seen a movie called Inception, a dream within the dream within the dream. Maybe you have seen that movie. It's a that big movie, I think. But I don't remember. Anyways, so here you can see they have, first of all, max pooling, and then they have so-called one by one convolutions, and after that 3 by 3 convolutions. 1 by 1 convolutions, after that 5 by 5 convolutions. 3 by 3 max pooling, after that 1 by 1 convolutions. and then directly one by one. Like that, they have a recipe of convolution tunnels, thinking that different kind of structures, different kinds of uh, different levels of information must be captured in this depth-wise concatenation that you do here. So this is their thinking, but this is not actually required. Later on, the people realize that. But this is the Google test design choice, and then they had an operation called global average pooling. This is extremely important. So I have the Google Net analysis of the STEM network also. In this one, you can see briefly, in the say briefly, let's say, so height and width are 224, and then you have stride 2 networks, stride 2 again, and then you can see network aggressively downsamples to height and width 28 by 28. You can see that. So aggressive downsampling. So total from 228 to 28 spatial resolution compared to VGG network. So memory is 49.2.9 megabytes. This is just 7.5 megabytes. Parameters 124K. This is 1.1 million. Megaflops 418 is 7,485. So you can see the design choices are so important. The hardware is not the only concern. The correct design choices are so very important. So this is the inception module. We will not talk about that too much. We will skip that. But we will talk about the global average pooling operation. So now in the network, finally, they had 1,024 channels and 7 by 7 spatial resolution. So this is the tensor that they have. So what they did was global average pooling means every sort of channel they average to one cell. So this is a one by one, it's like a vector. So they had it like that. So no large fully connected layers at the edge. So now you do no longer require large fully connected layers because we realize that due to these large fully connected layers, the amount of parameters is extremely high because of that. So now you get rid of that problem. No large fully connected layers at the end. Instead uses global average pooling to collapse the spatial dimensions and one linear layer to produce the class scores. So in VGG16, most parameters were in the fully connected layers. So this is an advantage. Spatial information destroyed not by flattening but by global average pooling, then only one fully connected layer. So this is the design choice that Google Net used, and this is an important choice. People can still use that. Yeah. So then also, then you can see that Google Net is a very deep network. You can see so many layers are there. So there's a thing called backpropagation. As you know, the gradients have to propagate back. Uh, in this class, maybe we will not talk about those things, but if anyone is interested, I can show how the backpropagation happens. Mm, because of the large number of layers, the gradients vanish. They become smaller and smaller, and the network is very difficult to train. So by that time, the so-called the batch normalization operation had not been discovered, I think. So what they did was they had some so-called auxiliary classifiers where the loss is computed and backpropagated. So like that. So they had auxiliary classifiers at the middle. Yeah. So if you summarize all this history, imagine large-scale visual recognition challenge was there, and we know that the AlexNet won that with these operations, max pooling, ReLU nonlinearity, large number of parameters, and two GPU implementation. VGG said that all convolutions must be 3 by 3, stride 1, pan 1. All max poolings are 2 by 2, stride 2. After pooling, double the number of channels. Google same network, inception module, global average pooling, and auxiliary classifier. So these were the concepts introduced by these networks. Okay. Yeah. So you can, if you have any question, you can ask. Then we will discuss about the ResNet and a very, very important contribution. You are most welcome to turn on the mic and ask, or you can type in the chat window also if you have any question. Do not hesitate for these things. Okay, then, if you don't have any questions, we'll move to the ResNet. Uh, so this residual network is by Kai-Ming He. Kai-Ming He. So Kai-Ming He. He worked for Microsoft at that time, Microsoft Research. Um, I mean, he has made so many important contributions. Even the way to use self-supervised learning, I showed you this mask image model, MIM, right? When I started these lectures, mask image model paper, the 2022 paper, was first authored by Kanike. So you can see first author, he is an author or something. So these are great contributions. Okay, residual networks. With batch normalization, deeper models could be trained. Deeper models, deeper model does work. Okay, but but they realize that deeper model does worse than shallow model. Bigger is not better. In contrast to, not contract, in contrast, okay, silly mistake, contrast to previous experience. Initial guess, deeper model is overfitting since it is much bigger than the large model. So deeper model has so many parameters. So what they thought was it is overfitting. Overfitting means you just learn to memorize the data set. So therefore, for the training images, it is producing correct output, but for test images, it is not producing the correct output because it has just memorized the training images. This is what you observe in the test error. You can see the test error here, right? With the test error with number of iterations. Uh, you can see for the 20-layer network, this is shallow, right? Shallow, shallow. Only 20 layers is making some error, maybe let's say 10%, but the 56-layer network is making more error. I mean, this can be true if it has totally overfitted. But when they observed the training error, they were really surprised why even in the training error also the 56-layer network was doing worse than the 20-layer network. You can see this is extremely surprising because a 56-layer network is a large network. So during training time, you should be able to even properly memorize the training data than the 20-layer network. Even if it memorized, it should have produced better output than the 20-layer network. So in both testing and training, 56-layer network, which is larger, was doing worse than the 20-layer network. So therefore, they said, in fact, the deep model seems to be underfitting since it also performs worse than the shallow model on the training set. It is actually underfitting. The 56-layer network has not been able to emulate the 20-layer model. That means do the work of the 20-layer model because this is an optimization problem. The gradients are not propagating back. That was the problem. So a deeper model can emulate a shallow model. So it should be able to emulate. So this is so you take this 20-layer network. Okay, 20-layer network. Then what you do is you on top of that you put 36 layers. Okay, 36 layers that just learn the function one. Doesn't do anything. Just multiplies by one. That's it. Identity function. So therefore, if 20 layer network has some accuracy here, the 36 layer, 56 layer one should also have the same accuracy if they learn the identity function. So so therefore, a deeper model can emulate the shallow model. A copy layers from the shallow model, set extra layers to identity one. Thus, deeper model should do at least as good as a shallow model. So therefore, they hypothesized, they thought, this is an optimization problem. Deeper models are harder to optimize. And in particular, don't learn identity function to emulate shallow model. So they cannot learn the identity function of the function one. They cannot learn the one. Because of that, they realized, okay, if they cannot solution, change the network. So learning identity function with extra layers is easy. So therefore, what they did was so they had the so-called plain book. So here is the input text. They had the conv, they had the ReLU here, they had the conv, and then you have the output, let's call it HX. So what they did was they took the input X here and directly added that after the two conv layers. The adding means just one, right? One. So here directly you have through this X goes, and this X comes here, right? See, if this part is Fx, If this part is fx, this is fx plus x. So x turns out to be fx plus h. If these are set to 0, the whole block will compute the identity function. Yeah. So this is their assumption. This is their solution, and that turned out to be true. And also, you will see that this gradient so-called backpropagate. This gradient backpropagation is also easy for this. Maybe I will try to talk about it somehow. Backpropagation. Yeah. Maybe I don't have it in this slides. I'm not too sure. Yeah. I hope you understand it. It's an important concept to understand. If you don't understand, you have to ask me, please. Okay. I hope you are okay with this. So let's move forward then. So with this is so you can see it's residual. So this part of the network learns the so-called residual. So X is directly fed. What is not in X or the residual is learned. That's why they are called ResNets or residual networks. A residual network is a stack of many residual blocks. Regular design like VGG, each residual block has two 3x3 convolutions. These convolutions are 3x3. 3x3 cons. Network is divided in two stages. The first block of each stage halves the resolution. It's tied to and con and doubles the number of channels. So this is the thing. So we can see them in detail later, but I will show you this the diagram also. So you can see two 3x3 convolutions here, and you are feeding the X to this. Another 3x3 convolution, you're feeding the X or the input back like that. Those are called the skip connections. Skip connections. So after that block, you can see the number of channels has been doubled, right? And it has become 120 from 64. So after that block, you can see that this has become 512. But of course, the size of the tensor, spatial size has become half because of the stride to convolution. I hope that this is clear. If anything is not clear, you have to please ask me. So uses the same aggressive stem as the GoogleNet to downsample the input by 4. So they have large stride to convolutions and stride to convolutions to quickly downsample. And then of course, as like the GoogleNet, no big fully connected layers, instead use global average pooling. So that idea also continued. So you can see people learn from the previous year's papers and then come up with ideas. So therefore, if you want to make a contribution in computer vision and machine learning, you have to be familiar with the previous year's papers, and you should be able to quickly understand them because there's no time to understand them. I mean, spending a lot of time. So you should be able to quickly understand and find a problem in these networks and make a contribution. Okay, so we will analyze this. There are different ResNet sizes, ResNet 18, ResNet 34, and so on. So we will briefly study some of those things. So this one is ResNet 18. So first of all, the stem one convolution layer is there. The stage one, two ResNet blocks. That means 4 convolutions. Remember, each ResNet block has 2 convolution layers, like so. See, 2 convolution layers. So 2 ResNet blocks, that means 4 convolution layers, 2 ResNet blocks, 4 convolution layers, 2 ResNet blocks, 4 convolution layers. So altogether, you can see, then finally a linear layer to give the 1000 output. So 1 layer here, 1 plus 16 layers there, plus 1 linear layer there. So altogether 18 layers. This is the 18 layer ResNet, or we call it ResNet 18. So top 5 error 10.92 is an extremely good error. Total number of gigaflops 1.8 gigaflops. Then they made ResNet 34, same 1 column layer, 3 ResNet blocks, 4 ResNet blocks, 6 ResNet blocks, 3 ResNet blocks. So finally, you will have 34 layers and gigaflops this much, and the error has reduced. So VGG16, they had 13 gigaflops, massive amount of computations. The top 5 was even higher than that. Yeah, that's about the residual network. But then they did not stop there. They made another advancement there, so called a bottleneck block. So here you can see now this input is taken and fed it to the output. So this is the regular residual block, regular residual block. So now if you compute the floating point operations here, you can see the output structure size that's called HW, 3 by 3 convolutions from C number of channels to C number of channels. So if you remember, we looked at this, right? So if you when you just say 3 by 3 convolutions, they are not actually 3 by 3 convolutions. The depth is 5, right? Sorry, depth is 3. So these are 3 by 3 convolutions, but you know that the convolution kernel has depth 3. So therefore, C squared HW 9C is the total number of parameters, and 9C computations. So if you have to take the output structure size, the output tensor size is HWC, and for each of these cells, you have to do that 9C computation. So therefore, you get 9 HWC squared, many computations. So if you don't understand this, you have to go back the slides and see how you compute the number of computations, floating point operations. So altogether, you can see 18 HWC squared floating point operations are there. But here, what they did was they had a 1 by 1 convolution, making the number of channels from 4C to C. And only on the C channels, they did the 3 by 3 convolution. Then after that, they expanded the number of channels C to 4C. So this is there. So then 17 HWC square total flux, but there is a slight problem in this diagram. In both these cases, we have to equal the number of channels. If the input number of channels is 256, this is also 256. So here C is equal to 256. Here 4C is equal to 256. So that's the difference. So you cannot just use these formulas to compute. Okay, so if you take this so-called bottleneck layer, you can see the 1 by 1 convolutions and 1 by 1 convolutions here. You have 256 channels here that has been made 64, and the 3 by 3 convolutions happen in 64. And then you once again expand the number of channels to 256 so that this structure can be added element by element. So there is a simple computation here. So I will briefly explain that. If you have a question, you can ask. Directly performing 3 by 3 convolutions on the with 256 features maps at the input to output. So 256 times 256 3 by 3, approximately 600,000 floating point operations. Using 1 by 1 convolutions to reduce 256 to 64, which maps then 3 by 3 convolution and then 1 by 1. So for this 1 by 1 convolution, 16 key operations. Then for the 3 by 3 convolution from 64 channels to 64 channels, 36,000 operations. Then 64 channels, 256, 1 by 1 convolution, 16,000 channels, altogether 70,000 computations. So 600,000 to 70,000. You can see massive reduction in the computations because of this. So you can see these choices have made these networks extremely useful. So for the ResNet also, I have the analysis, but I will not go through this. But I think one I described to you how to get the number of layers and so on. Then if you think about this ResNet 18 and 34, those use the so-called basic blocks. And then when you increase the number of channels to reduce the computations and to increase the depth, they use the so-called bottleneck layers that we saw in the previous slide. So that is a ResNet 152, which had amazing 5.94 top 5 error. So I think that by this time it surpassed the human level of image classification. ResNet. So then they had even larger ResNets, I think. Yeah. Okay. So this these other things we will not discuss. You can look at them. So from this Kansiani, he published this work to show that bigger is not always better. Innovations typically reduce the parameters despite the deeper networks. So that means you have to think and design these networks. For example, if you take the gigaflops, yeah, and the top one accuracy, for example, you can see this is the total number of parameters. This circle size shows the total number of parameters. So you can see if you take VGG19, massive, right? Massive number of parameters. So 40 gigaflops, but it achieved only 70% top one accuracy. But if you take the ResNet 50 with a very small amount of giga operations and very small number of parameters, it was able to achieve very high accuracies. And then you have this Inception, these ones, so they had better accuracies. And this thing goes even further. Maybe I have some of those things not written, so but you can see after that also their progress was made. Right? I don't have them here. So then in 2016, it was a collection of model ensembles. Uh, then in 2017, they came up with the so-called group convolutions. But I'll let you ask any questions if you have before going into the group convolutions. Okay, so I will describe that briefly, not too much in detail. So you can see the bottleneck residual block here. But in the group convolution, what they did was they divided the number of channels into groups. So you can see here 4C to 4C channels to C. Here what they did was 4C channels to small c, 4C channels to small c. Can you see that? So finally, this small c becomes 4C, small c becomes 4C. So this capital C is divided into several small c number of channels. This is what they did. Now, if you take an example here, if capital C is 64, that means 64 channels. And if you choose four groups, then you can see C is equal to let me think, I cannot explain that right now. Due to some reason, I don't remember how to explain that. So I'm sorry about that. Uh, but this is fine. This one is fine. So convolution with group now two groups. So you can see here we have C in number of channels. Those C number of channels you divide into C in divided by two channels and C in divided by two channels. Those are the two groups. And then carry out the convolutions with those number of channels. And C out divided by 2, C out divided by 2, output number of channels, those you concatenate. So you can see here, if you have convolution with one group, C in HW is the input, weights C out, C in KK, output C out H prime W prime, flop C out C in K squared HW. All convolution kernels touch all C channels of the input if you have just one group. But if you have two groups, you can see these convolution kernels only touch these channels. These convolution kernels only touch these seen by two channels. So that's the change. But there is a thing called depth-wise convolution. This is very important to remember and understand. You have number of groups equal to number of input channels. That means if you have 64 channels here, you will have 64 groups. What that means is each group will compute on do the computers only on one channel. That's why they are called depth-wise convolutions. Each input channel is involved with n different k by k filters to produce n output channels. So this is the thing. Okay. So convolution with G groups also I have given what happens in the floating point operations and so on. Rex next came. They used the groups. This is the 2017 was they had the group convolutions. They were able to make the errors better. Then another contribution 2006 is the squeeze and excitation network. I will not totally describe it, but briefly say what it is. So they use the input tensor and compress that to 1 by 1 times C number of channels. Now this also has C number of channels. You do some additional computation also here. Now you have 1 by 1 times C. With that you multiply each of these channels. These are the channels. There are C number of channels. So this is, we call it channel-wise attention. Channel-wise attention. So this is again a very famous computation for channel-wise attention. And then this slide I will not describe. So we skip that channel slide. And then densely connected neural networks. Those are there again. Then mobile nets. In the mobile nets, still they are used. They are very important if you want to run in a small device. You can see 3 by 3 C to C convolutions. Here you can see 3 by 3 C to C convolutions with C groups. So you can see depth-wise convolutions have been used. That idea they used to reduce the amount of computations in mobile nets, tiny networks. Yeah, there's a speed up. So you can see here 9C squared HW is the amount of computations. Here you can compute. I will not explain that too much. You can use the formula and find out 9C times C squared HW. As C goes to infinity, this becomes just 9. So computations become really advantageous when you have large number of groups. So then they had the shuffle net. They using the simple kind of ideas, mobile net V2, shuffle net V2, and so on. Okay. One more important idea is so-called neural architecture search. Neural architecture search means now there are decisions to make, right? Number of filters, the filter height, filter width, stride height, stride width, and so on. There are decisions to make. So those decisions in the previous networks that we discussed were made by hand by human beings. But in this one, they had the so-called control RNN, and then they trained a child network with architecture to get accuracies R. And then after that, compute the gradient of parameters scaled by R to update the controller, and then sample the architectures like that. So those parameters they decided through this learning network. So that's why it's called neural architecture search. So maybe you had a configuration string like filter width 5, filter height 3, number of filters 24. So that through this architecture, by finding the accuracy and correcting those architectures behavior, correcting those controllers behavior, they were able to find good architectures that are extremely accurate. So designing neural network architecture is hard. Let's automate it. That was what they want to do. One network or the controller outputs the network architectures, sample child network from the controller and train them. After training, a batch of child networks make a gradient step on the controller using policy gradient. Now this is I cannot explain now. Over time, control learns to output the good architectures. This is extremely computational heavy, but you can see in we call them NAS networks. In NAS networks. So NAS networks are there in these repositories of neural networks. We can use them. To summarize, early networks like AlexNet, ZDevNet, or VGG shows a bigger works better. Then GoogleNet started focusing on efficiency, aggressive stem, one by one bottleneck, and so on. They introduced this convolution. There's a mistake in the slide. Google, what is this? What are these things Google Net introduced? Then ResNet showed us how to train extremely deep networks limited only by the GPU memory. Started to show diminishing returns as the network got bigger and bigger. After ResNet, efficient net networks became central. How can we improve the accuracy without increasing the complexity? Lots of tiny networks were produced, MobileNet, ShuffleNet, and others. Neural architecture search promises automated architecture design. So these are the efficient nets. Then in this famous paper called efficient net paper, what they want to do is their models. It's a model scaling paper. A study identified that carefully balancing the network depth, width, and the resolution can lead to better performance. Then they use the neural architecture search to design a new baseline network and scale it up to obtain the family of models called efficient nets. Depth is D. Scaling the network depth is the most common way used by many convects, as you know. Scaling the width, scaling the with number of, they call it by width, they call it the number of channels. Is commonly used for small size models. Resolution, with high resolution input images, convects can potentially capture more fine-grained patterns. So with these, they had this rule alpha times beta squared times gamma squared is equal to 2. For any new phi, any phi, the total flops will approximately increase by 2 to the power of p. So they know how much to increase the computations, and based on that, they were able to find the changes that they had to do in the depth, W, and resolution. They did that by a lot of computations. So you can see, compared to other networks like neural architecture networks, ResNets, and so on, efficient nets turned out to be extremely accurate. So efficient net B node they had designed, others they did network architecture search. So if you want a network, you can use an efficient net. Okay, I will give the summary also later on. Then in 2022 came the ConNext. It's a 2022 contribution. It's called Convolution Networks for 2020s. This paper re-examined the design spaces and tests the limits of what a ConNext can do. It modernizes standard ResNet toward the design of a vision transformer. So they had a vision transformer called swing transformer. So I don't think we'll have time to discuss transformers in this class. If anyone is interested, we can discuss with an additional lecture maybe after the exam, and discover several key components that contribute to the performance of along the way. For example, they had inverted convolutional block, large kernel, micro design, ReLU to GeLU, these kind of activation functions, batch normalization to layer normalization, kernel size 5, 7, 9, all these things they experimented. I think they also had a lot of computational power. So therefore the so-called ConNext T, ConNext T is the blue one, that had better performance than the so-called swing transformer. 82 compared to the Swin transformers 81.3. So that means transformers performance were able to be obtained by that. So then they had the B and Swin and B. This I think tiny this base that has this much, but they were able to exceed that. Okay. So in summary, what architecture to use? Don't be a hero. I'm not saying that. Justin Johnson is saying this. For most problems, you should use an off-the-shelf architecture. Don't try to design your own. If you care about accuracy, you can use ResNet 50, ResNet 101, efficient nets B3 to B7. Or Connext. Connext is a good choice, what I showed in the previous slide are excellent choices. Efficient nets combine high accuracy with efficiency through compound scaling, and Connext modernizes CNN to rival transformers. So these things you have to memorize, I think. If you want lightweight efficient network, for example, mobile or real-time applications, we can consider mobile nets, shuffle nets, efficient net B0 to B2. That's a summary. So all these networks are available on different platforms. So um, maybe you can ask a ChatGPT question for that. Maybe in PyTorch, how do I use existing architectures like ResNet 101, efficientness, and Connext. So if you go to Torch Vision models, you will be able to have this so-called pre-trained models. So let's go to this. So you can see it's very easy to use these models. There is those things are there. So ResNet 50. So at least you understand what these things mean now. Weights means they have pre-trained them using ImageNet, I think, and you can use them. So the other models are also many other models are also there. Uh, so you can look for the existing models. So for different kinds of tasks, for image classification and segmentation. So these are classification. So you can see AlexNet, Convex, all these things are there, but you should know what to use. EfficientNet V2, VGG Vision Transformers, Wide ResNet, ResNext. Connext is not there, I think. I do not know that actually. So small, medium, and large, all these things are there. So EfficientNet, regular EfficientNet, you can see that one has B0, B1, B2, B3, B7, and so on, which I showed in the slides. I do not know about EfficientNet V2, I'm sorry. So you can see then mobile nets, they are good for small ones. So you have to have some idea about these things. So swing transformer is something that I just briefly mentioned in the slide. So Connext implements the swing transformer like thinking that. So I don't think they have on next year. I don't know too much about these available models. Connext, yeah, of course, it's at the very top, right? Connext is at the very top. It's there. So Connext, Connext tiny, Connext small, Connext base. So this Connext paper is a 2022 paper. Connext is a 2022 paper. Um, this is that paper. Connect for 2020. It's a 2022 paper. So if you look at the paper, you can see that the diagram that I had, they are showing they are comparing with the vision transformers. So that's all I want to do about the convolutional neural networks. But for your course, I have the slides lined up object detection we had to discuss, and segmentation briefly, and the current topics. On the next day, we can do that, I think. But this structure from motion, I could not do. And epipolar geometry. One day will not be sufficient. Uh, so, now the 1 hour is over. I will stop the recording.